Hello, and welcome to this second session in our webinar series on new directions in international development and procurement. We're very glad you could join us. We had a very successful first session on Monday, and we're going to have another session on Friday in anti-corruption, as we'll be talking about in a minute. Today's session is on contract administration, and we're going to be looking at contract administration primarily at the World Bank, using it really as a case study from several different angles, from a policy perspective in terms of the current policy and practice structure for the World Bank, and we'll be looking at it from the perspective of practical issues that have arisen in World Bank, Multilateral Development Bank procurement over the last decades. And then the third part of our session with Matteo Amerigo de Laurentiis is going to be talking about specific policy issues that are now presenting in World Bank procurement. We're very glad again that you could join us. Just a little bit of background. I'm Chris Eukins. I'm the Lynn David Research Professor of Government Procurement Law at George Washington University Law School. I've been a professor since 2002, and have been very glad to watch the advancement of the procurement community internationally. Really, historically, the program, our students had not worked extensively in international development, and you can see that since the turn of the century, we really have had our students have much broader involvement, as you'll see in just a few minutes, because two of our graduates are presenting today. The recording from this program will be available probably in the next few hours. It's published on Public Procurement International on the program page, and will also appear on the GW Law Government Procurement Law program YouTube page. The chat from today's session will be the chat will be published along with the materials. If you could, and I see we have a hand up. If you have a question along the way, if you could put it in the chat, I'd be very grateful. We also have a Q&A function, but usually it's more efficient if you ask questions in the chat. And we oftentimes ask our panelists, we have a number here, we ask our panelists then to respond to your questions directly in the chat, if at all possible. We have a number of speakers who all have official roles. Today they're appearing in their personal capacities. So for this webinar series, we have over 450 registrants from 85 countries and 6 continents around the world. Really an extraordinary opportunity to speak to the public procurement community around the world. And we're very, very glad that you can join us. Today's session, as I mentioned, is focused on contract administration, and literally hundreds of folks who have signed up for our series spend day-to-day, they work day-to-day in contract administration. I think for those of you working in every country, you'll begin to see common patterns in the issues that arise in contract administration. I think you're going to find this a very interesting program. Today, the 3 speakers that we're going to have today are Vinay Sharma, Jean-Jacques Verdeaux, and Matteo Amerigo de Laurentiis. I'm just going to quickly go through their bios again. Vinay is recognized as a distinguished authority on international public procurement, governance, and institutional reform with over 35 years of global experience spanning multilateral development banks, public infrastructure enterprises, and high-level advisory roles, linking fiduciary integrity with development effectiveness, market creation, and institutional trust. He began his career in India's public sector infrastructure enterprises, working on large rail and urban transport projects. He subsequently transitioned to international development finance, serving in senior leadership roles at the African Development Bank and the World Bank. In those capacities, he led major policy reforms, contributed to the modernization of procurement frameworks, strengthened fiduciary oversight systems, and supported operations across Africa, Asia, Europe, and fragile and transition countries. He holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in civil structural engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology in India, in Roorkee, India, where he was awarded gold medals. Also have Jean-Jacques Verdeaux, who's currently the Procurement Practice Manager for the Latin American and Caribbean region of the World Bank. He's a U.S. French-educated lawyer who first joined the bank in 2002 as a senior procurement specialist in the Africa region, and has held since then various positions, including senior counsel in the legal procurement group, procurement coordinator for the Andean countries, and lead procurement specialist for the Middle East and Northern Africa. Before his current assignment, he worked at the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, where he was the senior procurement advisor for the Energy Department in his current position as manager for Latin America and the Caribbean. He leads a team of more than 35 World Bank procurement specialists who supervise operations in 32 countries. He graduated from George Washington University Law School, got an LLM in federal government contracts in 2002, and the University of Lorraine from the faculty de droit de Nancy in 1988. He's admitted to the Paris bar. He's fluent in both Spanish and English and lived for years in the United States and Latin America. He's currently based in Panama. There's a note that Jean-Jacques he, as I noted, he graduated in 2002 from our program at GW. In 2003, he published the first real breakthrough comparative piece in our journal, the Public Contract Law Journal. Jean-Jacques is very much in his career. He's an example of tremendous success as a graduate. His writing and the work that he's done, he really has helped bring GW and the Washington D.C. procurement community into a much broader international orbit. We're very, very grateful for that. Matteo is a recent graduate of our program. He graduated with high honors from GW Law School. We're very, very proud of him. He's going shortly be joining private practice in a Washington D.C. law firm. He's right now, as American lawyers know, he's sweating out the bar right now. He's preparing for the bar exam. So we're very grateful that he was able to give us the time that he has. He's going to be talking about a note he published in the Public Contract Law Journal. So he's the next generation behind Jean-Jacques, and that note focuses on issues of ensuring that we can bring in the World Bank can bring in top level contractors to compete for its contracts. Co-moderating with me today is Benedetta Audia. She's the principal of International Development LLC, a firm advising private sector companies in international development and business matters, and providing counsel to multilateral organizations, non-governmental organizations, and government entities. Benedetta, would you like to say hello?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I've given a bit of an overview of what international development is and what its primary goals are. So today I will just, sit and watch and contribute as questions are posed. Thanks again, Chris, for the invite.
Thank you very much. We have relatively limited time today, so I thought I would just turn it right over to Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques, if you don't mind, I can advance the slides for you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, for your kind words. I have to say that maybe I would not have had that career in international procurement without having first being in GW in the program like 26 years ago, 25 years ago. So thank you for the invitation. So I am at the World Bank and I am covering Latin America and the Caribbean. So hello to everybody who is in that part of the world and to everybody else in other parts of the world too. I'm going to go try to be concise and to go to the heart of it. And really, first of all, I always start with that because not all the people know exactly what the World Bank is doing or have an idea more or less, but just dig into what is the World Bank. And now we are talking about the World Bank Group. Actually, we have 5 institutions. To make it, simple, we have actually, I would say, two main big institutions, if you wish, which, I mean, the first group or the first institution is what we call usually IBRD, IDA. IBRD has been created, after the World War II, IDA a little bit later at the time of decolonization. But these two institutions within the World Bank are essentially the institution that is doing sovereign lending or sometimes what we call consensual financing. So it's not only, lending, sometimes is, zero interest lending or even, grants to the least developed countries. So there's the first, I would say, big part of the World Bank. And when we mention World Bank, usually we mention these two institutions, which actually are forming only one. Then we have another, I would say, significant institution called IFC. They are the one actually financing the private sector for the same objective of the World Bank, which is, development and fighting poverty. So they are the ones actually investing in the private sector or lending to the private sector. Sometimes they have to do procurement as the other institution that I just mentioned, IBRD, IDA. And then two others. For the lawyers, maybe ICSID is the most relevant one. ICSID is really the arbitration institution of the World Bank, and you could see ICSID, arbitral decision all over the world, especially when you have a foreign direct investment in a country. And we have MIGA that is very important these days because they are providing essentially guarantee. The last one being to Argentina. We did a guarantee of $2 billion to Argentina to help them, with their financial situation. So, if I could go to the next slide. So, when we are talking then about the World Bank, we are talking again essentially about IBRD IDA, so the sovereign loan. But and why? Because that's actually where we are lending to countries through mostly investment projects. So not all the financing that the World Bank is doing are investment projects, but most of it are investment projects. And investment projects are which are translated into contract and to government contract that actually procured by our what we call sometimes our clients. We should not say clients, but by our borrowers, which are sovereign entities. It represents today, so these government contracts represent a big chunk of the overall World Bank portfolio. In the last, I think last year or in 2024, it was close to 150 billion. We have a number of projects, and project could be in a lot of different sectors, and there are new priorities when it comes to sectors, but a lot in infrastructure, obviously, and at other, in human development like education, health, but also digital and even, digital network and these kind of things. We have almost 150 beneficiary countries. The World Bank have more members, but in all these members, they are the ones that are considered a kind of donor, and the other one are recipient. So we have close to, I think, 190, these days, or a little bit maybe less than that, member countries in the World Bank. The World Bank has difference with the UN because I know that you talked about the UN. In the World Bank is not one country, one vote. In the World Bank is really representing, shareholding. So the US has most of the shareholding. After comes Japan, if I'm not mistaken, then China, actually, and now the third one. And then you have Germany, France, the UK, and others that part of the World Bank. So we have in the world we have a number. We are covering all the regions. We are now divided into 8 regions. In my region, which is the Latin America and Caribbean region, we are closer to 20 billion in terms of portfolio out of the 248 billion currently. So what are the priorities? So a lot has to do with infrastructure. There is new priorities supposedly, but actually it's always a little bit the same, especially infrastructure. And why infrastructure? Because we say that, we say there is no development without infrastructure. There was a time at the bank that I think more than 25 years ago, where the bank were thinking that, economy was driving everything, even development. But we are a little bit back to the basics. I would say the saying that infrastructure is a big part of development, and it's evident to a lot of people that it's again now a big priority of the bank. Infrastructure. We have other priorities, health, tourism, what we call agro-industry and value manufacturing. I have to say that you may not see education there, but education is considered some kind of soft infrastructure. So education is still a very big priority of the World Bank. So we implement project to mainly the procurement of government contracts by our borrower countries. And then we may go to the next slide. And our borrowers could not do whatever they want when it comes to procurement. They have to follow a kind of legal framework. I'm saying legal framework because it's important to know that when the World Bank is financing actually through a loan agreement, the loan agreement is considered a treaty. So whatever is the loan agreement actually supersedes, the national law. So we have what we call a procurement regulation. Before it was called procurement guidelines. It were not guidelines. Actually, it's maybe better word to say procurement regulation that is going to govern how procurement could be carried out. And essentially, very, very much detailed in what we call international procurement, which are, procurement that are, above a certain threshold and they are going to attract usually international competition. So that comes also for these international processes with another set of documents, which are standard bidding documents. I mean, you could find that in the website of the World Bank, and that's really the whole legal framework that I have to say we, in one way or other, is really imposed on the borrowers. I mean, we always say that the borrowers are responsible for the procurement and the administration of the contract. That is true. What is not true is that they could not receive financing with the World Bank if they do not follow this regulation and standard bidding documents for the high value contract. And most of my work and work of my staff, and Vinay was in charge of overall procurement all over the bank, was to make sure that these regulations were actually followed by our borrowers. And we have a lot of issues to deal with, in particular when it comes to national law versus bank procurement, I would say, policy. So we may go to the next slide
So,
and just
Jean-Jacques,
yeah.
can I interrupt you with just two quick questions? The first one is from a member of the audience. How does the World Bank intersect with charities in the borrower nations?
So charities are not recipient. Charities are not recipient of the World Bank financing, but charities and a lot of NGO are service provider or I would say contractor of World Bank financing. That means that we have a number of NGO. Actually, I think one of the UN agency, for instance, I'm not an NGO, but the UN agency is one of the top supplier of World Bank finance contracts. So the contracts again are the contracts of the borrower. They contract with a lot of private firms, but we have also NGOs that are part of it. So they do not receive financing, which is very different from other development agency. And even I think USAID was going through charity foundation, things of that sort. In our case, they are not the direct recipient of the financing, but indirect, I would say, if they are contracting with the borrower.
So the second question has to do with this intersection between the procurement regulation and the borrower nations laws. The borrower nations are rapidly developing their own laws, and they also they are oftentimes formed. So I was lecturing on Friday in a country where by law they're required to publish their government estimates because as a result of local corruption, that information is leaking out. So they publish the estimates in order to forestall the corruption. So the local law is rapidly evolving, is rapidly maturing, and it oftentimes is nuanced because it's dealing with a local situation, and that may not align with the World Bank's procurement regulations. How do you balance those two?
Well, I mean, part of our job, I mean, on top of, I would say enforcing somehow our bank policy is really, procurement reform. We have been engaged in that for a long, long time, across the different countries. I have to say that it was a huge priority for a number of years. It's still a priority, but maybe less these days than it was before, because really we're intended to change the system. But changing the system is a long way. I mean, it looks, easy, on the outskirts, I mean, from outside, but when you have to actually, push for reform, it took a long time. I have to say that, a political system, even a procurement system, comes from, culture, history, sometimes geography and things of that sort. And it's very, very difficult to change. And Vinay and I know very well that, things that may have been started 20 years ago have not been implemented yet when, it was pushed by the World Bank. When it comes to national law versus international, what they have in their national law, usually I had a request that we are going to have an amendment on one of our clients. In their national law, they have an exclusion for whatever comes as international financing. So they usually recognize in their national law or regulation that whether it's financing from the World Bank or IBRD or any other international financing, their national law code does not apply. So that's really what it is. I mean, and that's the recognition of the special, regime, comes with this international finance. So,
Jean-Jacques,
yes.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question here. Can you talk a little bit about the cooperation between the World Bank and the UN? Because that also addresses the point about the support that is given by the World Bank to charity projects in an indirect manner.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's a very good question. So the UN actually, I mean, we are actually a kind of sister organization of the UN. I mean, we have a little bit the same regime when it comes to, when we're in the US, we have the same passport and things like that. But the UN actually, they have, I would say, two very much different role. And when I say UN, I mean UN agency, obviously, and different UN agency. So again, they could be a supplier, a contractor, a service provider in the contracts that we are financing. So their counterpart is the country, the borrower country. So that's one kind of role. And there is also in some circumstances, usually circumstances where you have a very, difficult situation, post-conflict type of situation, where it is true that not an NGO, but they are the recipient of, the financing and they could implement. That's usually very specific situation. Sometimes is a kind of what we call, implementing agency. They are the one implementing, they're the one actually contracting on behalf of the government that doesn't have at all the capacity. And really, we have seen, for instance, when I was working in Africa, that they were the one that were really the counterpart in some way, but still the financing was to the borrower. They were more an implementing agency than the recipients of the funds, if you wish. So that's a little bit the two roles. So obviously the UN is a very special, institution for us. I would say more not traditional, but it could be contractor service provider and even, sometimes procurement, playing as a procurement agent, but sometimes they are really an implementing agency. So it goes further. They are really the one who are going to implement the project and not only on procurement, but on all the aspects of a project implementation. And that has to do again a lot with post-conflict situation. And when you have a government that is either not functioning or not, not there yet.
Thank you. And if I can just add to this, this was made possible through the modifications that were introduced to the World Bank procurement framework, particularly in relation to alternative procurement arrangements. So there was an assessment that was made ex ante on the procurement regulations of several UN system organizations. And it was through that direct implementation was possible because it was happening beforehand, but when certain UN organizations were implementing World Bank funded projects, they were doing so following the World Bank rules, while after the modifications that were introduced with respect to the alternative procurement arrangements, it was possible for UN organizations to follow their own rules with respect to implementation. And again, echoing your comment in relation to the need to support countries that have that basically operate in a fragile context, either conflict and post-conflict. A few examples have been in Yemen, for instance, or Afghanistan, or a number of projects called Back on Track, where basically UN organizations were helping governments speed up implementation with respect to programs that were stalled or taking a bit longer because of the lack of capacity or other challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, you are completely right. So it's a kind of delegation of procurement to other institutions. I have to say that, I mean, the most common one is with other banks. Well, we've seen like we are doing with Inter-American Bank these days. Actually, that was made. I mean, we have a framework agreement also with other banks and with also Asian Development Bank and now with European Investment Bank. So we delegate to other banks, or they could delegate to us, but we could also delegate under APA to an agency within a country. Well, I think the first one might have been in India. I think Vinay may know more than me on that. But I think it was Power Grid, one of the major, energy agency entity in India. So it could be UN agency, it could be other banks, and sometimes it's not that often, but to an agency within the country. So let's talk a little bit of, and I'm glad that Chris said that I was talking on my personal, capacity, not representative of the World Bank. But let's talk about what's not going on and what's maybe not, so great these days with our bank finance contract. Matteo is maybe, complement that. But I want just to say that within the last 10 years or 20 years, we had several issues when it comes to our World Bank finance contract and procurement. We have seen one of the issue that is really a problem that was obviously emphasized by the president recently, 2 or 3 years ago, is the fact that we have a lot of companies that are not bidding in our bank finance contract, and very high level qualified international company are not bidding for different reasons. One of the reasons, and they feel that they are not operative in a competitive environment. Obviously, they have to compete with a lot of Chinese contractors these days, and you know that beyond procurement is sometimes a geopolitical issue. I am living in Panama, and I may have followed that what happened in Panama with the ports, along the canal. But beyond that, they are concerned about that, and especially that sometimes we may have also not always the best qualified firms to build for our contracts. And that's a trend that is going on, and that has been really something that the president and the bank wanted to address. So we came with a procurement change program. Actually, we implement a little bit ahead of time because we're in Latin America, and we felt the need in Latin America to implement that beforehand. So I'm going to go very, very quickly, but that's very important. So they were deciding in early 2025 to implement rated criteria, which is actually to give the premium of quality over price. And maybe Matteo is going to go over that. I'm sorry, Matteo, if it is really having a minimum weighting for technical criteria, minimum 50% going to 60% quality over price. It has been the regulation, or what we call a procurement framework, for a while. 10 years now, but it was not used, and for different reasons for our borrowers. Now it's mandatory, and not only it's mandatory since September 2023, but the minimum weighting of technical over cost is now part of the policy. We have what we say early market engagement. We want the borrowers to engage with the private sector. Is very difficult in a number of countries. Early market engagement, early in the procurement, but we are talking about contract administration, also during contract administration. And that's what we have. And you could see that what we call direct payment. In some instances, and the borrower has to agree to that, the bank could, as a financier, could pay directly to a contractor. And that's really to address one of the main issues we have. And really, sometimes that the firms have to deal with is really the fact of lack of payment or delay payment. And that's really a big, big issue for the contractors. We have imposed also now what we call local labor. So local labor, minimum of 30% in civil works, only civil works. Contracts, international civil work contract, 30% local labor, and that's to do a lot also with a request for some borrowers, and the fact that we wanted also, to comply with our mandate of development. We have a complaint system that has been around for a long time, but now everything is centralized to be able to follow, complaints, which are a very, very important tool that personally I would like to be extended beyond what is right now, like they have in EIB and EBRD, the two European, I would say, development banks that I think works very well. I work in EIB, and I could see what a complete, complaint system to the institution like the World Bank could change in terms of consistency, in terms of responsiveness, and addressing really the issue that bidders could face. Collaboration is that a little bit what Benedetta was mentioning is, this delegation. And obviously we try to aggregate procurement. We have a lot of contracts for relatively, medium value, and we try to aggregate procurement because in terms of transaction, in terms of, oversight is much better for us. So in a nutshell, it's a little bit a change program. We're implementing that. We have some result. In LAC, we have a very good result in terms of, for instance, we increased by 21% bidder participation in our contracts in our region. So it's a bit more challenging in other region, but in our region, we are very, very pleased to have on top of that, a very diverse set of suppliers coming from all over the world. And we are very, very proud of that because it's a little bit more challenging for others. And so I'm going to stop with my last slide.
Jean-Jacques,
Yes.
before you go to your last
Yeah.
slide, if you go back, maybe one point, and if you could say a few words about it, it would be great. Under collaboration, when you refer to mutual reliance agreements, I think what may be interesting for the audience to know is that the very basis to have these agreements in place was an assessment of basically similarities in frameworks, an ex-ante assessment that was concluded that could enable the conclusion of these agreements. So while in the past, these exercises were conducted on a case-by-case basis, on a project-by-project basis, the advantage of having these mutual reliance agreements and framework agreements is that there is an exercise that is conducted to make sure that there aren't that many differences between the frameworks of the organizations that the bank is cooperating with. And so this contributes to harmonization, which also helps contractors that want to work with multiple international development entities.
Yeah, that's correct. So, and just to on mutual reliance agreement, I mean, there's sometimes a question of terminology. Now it goes beyond procurement. So we just, we signed with the Asian Development Bank some time ago. We are supposed to sign one with the Inter-American Bank. And so it goes really beyond really beyond. So I have a question about research and development services. I could not see the whole question. But so when we say the World Bank, we are saying is the government who is contracting. So some project actually requires some research and development. Every project is different in itself. Obviously, we have very common, would say financing and contracts. But we could see when you look at the procurement plan, each project has procurement plan. When you look at procurement plan of one project, you would see sometimes research and development, especially, in IT or when they are doing some exploration thing, that sort. So just my last slide, and just to go over very, very quickly what is not still challenging for the World Bank, and I touch upon that, is really one of the main issue is competition. Still, we have issue of not that much competition from different countries. When I call competition, I mean the international procurement. A lot in Africa. We have a lot of obviously our shareholders and the main shareholders who are complaining about that. And again, if you talk about major, provider 15 years ago, what number of contract they had compared to now, the big difference. So they do not bid as much as they used to bid. So we have some issue regarding consistency across region, because now we are quite decentralized between region, which changed a little bit again. I think maybe it was a little bit better when Vinay was there, because we had a unified, I would say, operational procurement, unit, or I would say department or department. It's not the case anymore. We try to correct that these days, but we have a little bit of consistency issue sometimes between region. Still a problem of capacity with the borrowers. We have just launched what we call the professionalization of the procurement function in LAC. For those who are in LAC, who are interested in being certified in international procurement, that's a call for candidates. It's on the website, and you could look at that. And we are going to certify 240 people in the Latin American region, Spanish speaking. Complaints, we could go a little bit beyond. We could do more certainly on complaints. We are looking at that, and obviously we have to be a little bit more aware of how to manage risk, and that's sometimes something that we will try to address. I think partly with AI. I'm not sure that AI will, lower the risk as much as we would like, but that's one of the issues. So I'm stopping that. And again, I saw that there were several questions. I'm happy to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say there are a few questions here, and the last one is about repayment, right? So the question is, given that World Bank loans and the procurement they finance are ultimately repaid by borrowers, how do you ensure that rated criteria remain economically sound from the borrower's perspective? Specifically, how do you avoid a situation where the borrower bears the additional cost of a more sustainable technology that the bank has requested through those criteria?
Now, that's a very, very good question. And what's, one of the arguments we hear again and again when it comes to rated criteria, and sometimes, supposedly higher cost. We have seen that when you look at the life of a project, that lowest cost do not provide neither quality nor actually saving for the country on the long run. Well, I see that again and again, and we all know that, a low cost bid that comes and chosen based on the cost. At the end, you have always either amendment when the cost does not represent actually, the challenge and what is supposed to be accomplished through the contract. So when you look at it, a best solution that could be costly, on the front. On the cost front, at the end is not costly anymore, especially when we're talking about, innovative solution. We are seeing that over and over in our contract. Even, when you are doing, basic civil works, civil works like roads and things like that. So, we could see that any quality and any innovative product that now are sometimes not accessible to our borrowers, actually comes with savings. And we have seen again that in some example where the countries may not have follow, their national law or the lowest cost. And I could tell you that we have ample example, a lot of example of that. So again, it's something we hear again and again, but that's true that when you have the best solution and the most innovative product at the end of the day, you are much better off in terms of development and results. So when it comes to results, there is no question that having, that part of tech, better quality product or service gives a much more better result in terms of development.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. We're going to turn over Vinay just for the audience as we transition to Vinay's presentation. So Jean-Jacques ended up focusing on risk management. Vinay, it's a central part of Vinay's presentation and more important part of procurement in general. I'll turn it over to you, Vinay. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from different parts of the world. Over the past 4 decades, I have had the privilege of working in public procurement and contract management as an engineer, as a procurement specialist, and later as a manager in both the World Bank and the African Development Bank. During that time, I participated in thousands of procurement decisions and reviewed hundreds of major contracts across virtually every sector: transport, energy, health, education, water, urban development. But one conclusion became increasingly clear to me. We devote enormous attention to procurement, to selecting the contractor, and we devote far less attention to ensuring that the contractor actually delivers the intended development results. Yet that second phase is where success or failure is ultimately determined. Everything I said today is really centered around one single proposition. Procurement determines who will deliver a project. Contract management determines whether the project delivers development. Can I have the next slide, please? So we often think of procurement as the end of a process. In reality, it's the beginning of another and arguably the more important and the more difficult phase. Winning a tender does not produce a road. It does not produce electricity. Awarding a consulting contract does not strengthen institutions. The contract merely creates the opportunity to achieve these outcomes. Everything that citizens care about happens afterwards. Will the contractor mobilize quickly, for example? Will decisions be taken on time? Will disputes be resolved constructively? Will unforeseen risks be managed sensibly? Will environmental and social commitments actually be implemented? Those are contract management questions. Citizens never celebrate a successful procurement process. They celebrate functioning hospitals, reliable electricity, safe roads, clean drinking water. In other words, citizens experience implementation. They don't experience procurement. That distinction is becoming increasingly important as development institutions move from measuring inputs towards measuring not outputs, but outcomes, results, and impact. Can we go to the next slide, please, Chris? People often ask why projects fail. The instinctive answer is almost always poor contractors. I think the experience has been rather different. In most cases, the seeds of failure are planted long before construction even begins. Poor preparation, incomplete investigations, weak designs, unrealistic schedules, optimistic cost estimates, poorly allocated risks, weak institutional capacity, slow governance arrangements. All of these are embedded inside the contract before anyone arrives on site. Now, we had done recently, a few months ago, an analysis of more than 2,600 World Bank finance contracts, admittedly only in the Africa region. And those contracts were worth almost $60 billion. I was struck by a very interesting observation. Most contracts did not require major amendments. Only 1/5 of the work contract required positive amendments. That tells us something encouraging. Major implementation problems are not inevitable. Good preparation works. But when preparation is weak, contract managers spend years dealing with consequences that could often have been prevented. In many respects, contract management begins during project preparation, not after contract signature. Next one, please. So the next one is actually, a real case, and I'm sure all of you would have seen many cases like this. But this is one of my favorite examples because it illustrates how seemingly minor drafting issues can have enormous consequences. The tender required suppliers to deliver educational material to final beneficiaries, but they didn't define what the final beneficiaries were. Were they government warehouses? Were they district offices? Were there thousands of individual schools? Different bidders made different assumptions, and each assumption was perfectly reasonable. The bids were therefore incomparable. The procurement had to be cancelled. The students lost a year of textbooks and so on. It was not only an administrative inconvenience, it had major human impact. Whenever we draft procurement documents, we do tend to think only about legal precision. We should also think about operational precision. Every ambiguity eventually becomes someone's problem during implementation. Poor contract management often begins with poor drafting. Can I have the next slide, please? Many organizations still view contract management as a back office administrative activity. The contract managers process invoices, they approve extensions, they issue certificates, they maintain files. These activities are important, they're not trivial. But they are not why contract management exists. I would suggest that the real purpose of contract management is managing uncertainty, technical uncertainty, commercial uncertainty, political uncertainty, environmental uncertainty, social uncertainty. In effect, contract managers continuously reconcile what was expected with what actually happens. This requires engineering judgment, commercial judgment, legal judgment, and perhaps most importantly, professional judgment. The contract manager is not simply administering a contract. He is protecting development outcomes. This is a fundamentally different way of thinking about the profession. So the next one is basically how risk allocation determines project success. As we had just mentioned, every contract is essentially a mechanism for allocating uncertainty. The temptation among most public procurement officials is to transfer as much of risk as possible to the contractor. On paper, that appears attractive. In reality, contractors simply either price those risks or refuse to bid altogether. One observation from the analysis that I was talking about particularly interested me. The contracts with the fewest amendments were not the largest projects. In fact, amendment rates followed something close to a U-shaped pattern. Small projects experienced relatively high amendment rates. Very large projects also experienced high amendment rates. Medium-sized projects performed best. Why? Probably because small projects often receive insufficient preparation and management attention, and large projects are inherently complex. The lesson is that risk is not simply a function of the project size. It is a function of preparation, governance, and institutional capacity. Good contracts allocate each risk to the party best able to manage it, not necessarily the contractor. And as you see, the employer would be the best party to manage, for example, ground conditions, utilities, permits, etc. And the contractor should essentially be managing only contract risks. The next one, please. So, commercial reality does not wait for administrative processes. Once a contractor has won a contract, equipment is ordered, personnel are recruited, banks arrange financing, subcontractors are engaged. If contract effectiveness is delayed unexpectedly, costs continue to accumulate. And I'm sure all of us have seen this. After signature, it takes months, sometimes years for the contract to become effective. But these costs appear as claims. This example reminds us that implementation actually begins before many employers believe it has begun. Good contract managers understand the commercial dynamics behind the paperwork. They appreciate that every administrative delay has commercial consequences. So how do employer delays impact the contract? That is in the next slide. The contractors certainly contribute to delays, but employers often underestimate their own contribution. Late approvals, late access to sites, late payments, delayed responses, slow design reviews. Each delay appears relatively minor. Collectively, however, they become extremely expensive. One of the more interesting findings from our recent analysis concerned when amendments occurred. The first amendment typically appeared around 18 months after the contract signature. But after that, something changed. Subsequent amendments occurred progressively closer together. So the first one took 18 months, the second one took a little lesser, and then the subsequent ones even lower. The contract effectively entered a cycle of repeated adjustments. In other words, implementation problems compound. They rarely remain isolated. That suggests an important management lesson. The first amendment should not simply be processed administratively. It should become a management signal. It should trigger closer oversight. The first amendment should prompt senior managers to ask, what is happening on this contract? What underlying problems are we trying to solve? Because if those questions are asked early, many later disputes can often be avoided. Can we have the next slide, please? So disputes almost never arise suddenly. They accumulate because of what? Weak supervision, for example, poor documentation, delayed decisions, uncontrolled variations. Each seems manageable. Together, when they all combine, it becomes litigation. One contract we recently examined accumulated 32 amendments over less than 2 years. The interesting question is not whether those amendments were justified. The interesting question is why management allowed 32 amendments to become necessary. Good governance intervenes long before that point. And when disputes do arise, documentation becomes decisive. In arbitration, memory has very little value. Contemporaneous records have enormous value. Documentation protects not only the employer, it also protects honest contractors and honest project managers. And I'm sure many of us realize that poor documentation has been the bane of government record keeping. Can we have the next slide, please? So every major infrastructure project changes. We know that. I mean, it's impossible. I haven't seen a single large infrastructure project not having changes. This is perfectly normal. The issue is not whether variation orders occur. The issue is whether they are well governed. whenever a variation is reviewed, I think four simple questions need to be asked. Why is this change necessary? Who benefits? Could it reasonably have been foreseen? Does the project still represent value for money? And perhaps a fifth one, could this variation have been avoided? Too often, we celebrate processing variation orders efficiently. Perhaps we should instead measure how many unnecessary variation orders were prevented through better preparation. This is a much better indicator of institutional maturity. The next one, please. So I would expose myself and I would be bold as to say that contracting is actually governance. For me, this is really the heart of the presentation. When I began my career, we spoke mainly about compliance. Today, we rightly speak much more about value for money. I believe the next evolution is to recognize that contract management is fundamentally about a governance. Every delayed payment influences future competition. Every poorly justified variation affects public confidence. Every unresolved dispute ultimately increases future bid prices. Every implementation failure weakens trust in public institutions. Contract managers therefore influence far more than individual contracts. They influence markets, they influence institutions. Ultimately, they influence citizens' confidence that governments can deliver. Governance is not exercised only through legislation. It is exercised every day through thousands of operational decisions taken during project implementation. That is why I increasingly describe contract managers not as administrators, but as governance professionals. The next one, please. So technology is changing implementation rapidly. 10 years ago, site supervision depended almost entirely on physical inspections. Today, we increasingly use drones, satellite imagery, artificial intelligence, digital payment verification, predictive analysis. These technologies allow us to detect implementation problems much earlier than before. But one principle remains unchanged. Technology supports judgment. It cannot replace judgment. Artificial intelligence may identify an anomaly, but only experience can determine whether that anomaly reflects fraud, poor planning, justified adaptation, or simply changing project circumstances. So what are the lessons? And that is in the next slide. So if I had to summarize the 4 decades of experience into a few observations, I think these would be my lessons. Most disputes begin long before disputes become visible. Preparation matters more than procedure. Documentation matters more than memory. Early intervention is almost always cheaper than formal dispute resolution. And perhaps my biggest personal lesson is this. Early in my career, I believed that successful procurement produced successful projects. Today, I believe something different. Successful procurement merely creates the opportunity for successful delivery. The real work begins after contract signature. The next one, please. So can we look at contracts a little differently? Perhaps we need to stop thinking of contracts merely as legal documents. A contract is a governance instrument, a delivery framework, a risk allocation mechanism, a partnership between the employer and the contractor, and an accountability system linking public expenditure to public value. If procurement selects the right partner, contract management determines whether that partnership is succeeding or not. So the last slide is about how I think this needs to be concluded. So let me conclude with one final thought. International development has invested enormous intellectual effort in improving procurement systems. That investment has been worthwhile. But I believe that the next frontier is implementation, because citizens never experience procurement. They experience roads, schools, hospitals, electricity, water, institutions, etc. In other words, they experience the results of contract management. So let me return to where I began. Procurement determines who delivers the project. Contract management determines whether the project delivers public value or not. If we truly wish to improve development outcomes, we must devote as much attention to managing contracts as we do to awarding them. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just for those interested in the forthcoming book by Vinay and Prabhat, who will be speaking on Friday, it's available in advance through Amazon, and also there'll be discount available, and you should reach out to the authors if you're interested in that. It's an excellent book, by the way. If Benedetta, you have a point?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly address, because unfortunately I have to log off on the hour. I wanted to address Carol's question in relation to intellectual property rights. Hello, Carol. Thank you for attending today's session. I just want to focus on the UN's approach with respect to intellectual property rights, especially with respect to private contractors. The general terms and conditions are quite clear in the sense that IP rights belong to the UN with the exception of pre-existing materials. And Carol, I couldn't agree more in relation to your comment with respect to addressing the issue of long-term sustainability, local ownership. But the issue of ownership is important because it is linked to the privileges and immunities that the UN enjoys. And for instance, joint ownership would be a problem if the other party is a private sector entity or even a government. But what I've seen is that at the end of the project, there is a possibility for a transfer to take place, and usually when the project outputs are transferred to the government, IP rights are included in the handover agreement. Just wanted to offer my views on this point. Thanks again for the question.
Thank you very much. We'll turn over to Matteo, who is quite literally the next generation because as we were joking around before the program, Matteo actually played football, or as we call it in America, soccer, against Jean-Jacques' son. So welcome to the next generation, Matteo. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Eukens. I'm extremely excited to be here to discuss my paper, especially with such an esteemed panel of practitioners in the field. So my paper observes contractor incentives and their related effect on bidder diversity in World Bank civil works contracts, really looking at how we can encourage top contractors to participate in these contracts. And this is particularly important in the realm of civil works and infrastructure, as they constitute almost 60% of the World Bank's portfolio in terms of contract dollars. And unfortunately, there's a challenge here where many suppliers still perceive MDB procurements as favoring lowest price in evaluation, which can discourage competition and participation by high-quality international firms. So my note really has two solutions that I propose. The first of which is increasing the proportion of requests for proposals, which are performance-based rather than conformance-based specifications, which can help increase the scope for innovation while providing also greater scope for consideration of quality and evaluation, and also adoption of collaborative contract models, which have a more balanced risk allocation for contractors, place contractors and borrowers on a more equal plane in terms of contract administration and performance, and also provide opportunities for early contractor involvement. So as we've discussed a little bit, there are significant challenges in terms of political, economic, and geopolitical developments in recent terms that have created a more difficult international development environment. And within this context, it's really important to maximize the World Bank's ability to attract a wide range of high-quality international contractors. So looking at my first solution that I propose, which is the third bullet point here. So more sophisticated procurement methods can improve outcomes and attract a broader range of quality suppliers. During my research, I recognized that requests for bids remain dominant, even in civil works procurement within the World Bank ecosystem. And the solution I propose is to increase the share of requests for proposals, which could increase participation by international contractors through international tools, through procurement tools such as initial selection and competitive dialogue. Looking at initial selection, it's a method that encourages innovation and ensures technical quality is meaningfully evaluated before price is considered. And just to give a quick rundown of it, it's applicants are assessed against two broad technical categories, qualification criteria and rated criteria. Only applicants meeting the qualification criteria then advance to investment against rated criteria. An evaluation panel will assign each proposal a application, a technical score, and then applicants will then be ranked according to their technical score. And the borrower will initially select applicants up to a certain predetermined number of applicants. Only those initially selected applicants will then be invited to submit proposals. And just to give an illustration of how this could lead to greater participation by top-ranked international contractors. For example, in Europe, suppliers' health and safety or ESG compliance requirements may be mandated by the European Union or domestic law. And these suppliers will have worldwide implementation of these high standards, including in their overseas subsidiaries, which can lead to higher direct and overhead costs, and thus to comparatively higher prices vis-a-vis suppliers from countries that do not have these same domestic legal requirements. So these requirements in turn may price European suppliers out of the market when price outweighs quality and evaluation. Initial selection through the process that I discussed offers a powerful tool to counteract these forces by acting as a quality filter and ensuring that contractors' quality is considered when they are invited to submit bids or proposals. Next slide, please. So the second proposal or solution that I propose is to adopt collaborative contract models, which optimize contractor risk and promote collaboration. So as we see, compared to traditional contract models, collaborative contract models such as the NEC, the new engineering contract, offer a more balanced risk profile for contractors and an emphasis on cooperation and early contractor involvement. They have clearer organization, which can reduce administrative burdens and losses and disputes due to procedural errors. They also have inclusion of objective tests for measuring delay events, as well as positive profit incentives for contractors that help orient the borrower-contractor relationship towards a more cooperative and less adversarial posture, and may positively impact contractors' risk perceptions of World Bank projects and therefore their willingness to submit bids or proposals. Just one thing that I wanted to touch on that's really important in these collaborative contract models is the potential for having early contractor involvement. In early contractor involvement, the contractor is involved from the earliest stage of the procurement and the design, which can lead to early identification of risks. The contractor who has technical expertise is able to identify risks in designs and provide value engineering before these risks manifest during performance, which can lead to lower costs and delays in performance and higher client satisfaction. We also see signals from the market that high-quality suppliers really want to be involved as early on in the process. And so adopting these sort of collaborative contract models would be an effective method of responding to that signal from the market. I know Jean-Jacques talked about this a little bit as well, but one of the key themes that came out during the course of my research was that NDBs are increasingly recognizing that procurement starts before the tender is issued, and that collaborative contract models have built-in early contractor involvement mechanisms, which respond to the need for early contractor engagement. The last point that I wanted to touch on is that capacity building really remains essential. The proposed solutions in my paper respond to a lot of market signals. However, they also increase the the requisite capacity to implement and manage contracts. So as we see here on the slide, borrower capacity to design procurements, evaluate quality, and manage contracts is a key determinant of successful outcomes. And investment in procurement professionalization through increased support to borrowers is really essential to realizing the benefits of RFPs and collaborative contract models. And we do see that World Bank support for capacity building really brings significant added value. And one of the little points of data that I found while conducting my research is that while only 8% of projects in the World Bank ecosystem receive expanded implementation support, these projects exhibit faster procurement times and greater use of innovative procurement team techniques. And this is really despite the fact that HICE, as it's called, is limited to projects that are occurring in significantly difficult contexts, whether through limited borrower capacity or difficult project context in terms of economic, political environments. So really, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, the crux of the challenge is to increase bidder diversity, especially for civil works, in the face of a very difficult political, economic, and geopolitical environment. And the two solutions that I have identified in my note, sort of increasing the share of requests for proposals and adopting collaborative contracting models, responds to a lot of the market demands that we are seeing from the private sector. So thank you, and happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Matteo. We're going to have to, unfortunately, we have to wrap up because we've gone a little bit over time. But I want to say, well, the best thing about being an Int'l professor is being able to be so proud of our students. And I'm very, very proud of both you and Jean-Jacques. You make the work that we do very worthwhile. Thank you. On Friday, we're going to be talking about anti-corruption and international development. Prabhat and Shope Williams, our newest colleague at GW, she's joining us from Stellenbosch University, are going to be talking about anti-corruption issues. And I very much hope that those of you in the audience can join us. Again, the recording from today's program will be available on the program page later today in Public Procurement International and also on the GW Law YouTube page. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you on Friday at the same time. Thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.